don't know what we're doing here anymore. America. Racism is small PP energy.
Mm-hmm.
Genocide is real small PP energy.
This is from Reuters. Israeli government celebrates Trump's election triumph.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his supporters celebrated Donald Trump's election as president, hailing what a leader of the Israeli settler movement called an ally who would support them unconditionally. But they would have got that if they would have got Harris too. Congratulating Republican Trump, Netanyahu said the former president had made history's greatest comeback. Your historic return to the White House offers a new beginning for America and a powerful recommitment to the great alliance between Israel and America, he said in a statement which was echoed by the leaders of the hard-right nationalists' religious parties in his coalition. The Palestinian militant group Hamas, which has been fighting Israel for more than a year in Gaza, said the election was a matter for the American people, but it called for an end to the blind support for Israel from the United States. We urge Trump to learn from Biden's mistakes, Hamas official Sami Abu Zari told Reuters. Is it Reuters? Reuters?
It is Reuters. I don't know if you know.
Told this article. Told Reuters. I don't know. The outcome is a relief for Netanyahu's coalition, which has clashed with Biden's Democratic administration over the conflicts in Gaza and Lebanon that have fueled protests worldwide and left Israel increasingly isolated internationally. As the world watched the U.S. election on Tuesday night, Netanyahu took the opportunity to sack his defense minister, Yoav Gallant, one of the Biden administration's and the U.S. military's favored representative in the government. The current administration trusted Minister Gallant, said Ephraim, a former brigadier general in the Israeli army. The removal of Gallant in the middle of a multi-front war that threatens to escalate into a full-scale confrontation with Iran drew protesters to the streets in Israel but was welcomed by Netanyahu's camp. Israel Katz, Gallant's replacement, who has been serving as foreign minister, said Trump's victory would strengthen the alliance with Israel and help to secure the return of the 101 hostages still remaining in Gaza. The first Trump administration delivered major wins to Netanyahu when it went against most of the world and recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and accepting Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. But it was not clear whether Trump's new administration would lend the same support in the middle of a war that could directly draw the United States, said Berku Ozklik, a researcher at the Royal United Services Institute in London. Topping a complex list of unknowns is how much leverage Trump will have over Netanyahu, she said. Despite friction between Netanyahu and Biden, the administration provided unstinting support to Israel since the Hamas attack on October 7th, 2023, that triggered the Gaza war, because that's when history started. Israel's settler leaders welcomed Trump's victory after Biden's administration imposed sanctions and asset freezes on settler groups and individuals involved in violence against Palestinians in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. They did what? You mean they actually did something? Wow. I'm surprised that they were capable of actually fucking doing something. I thought their hands were tied.
Mm-hmm.
We expect to have an ally standing unconditionally beside us as we fight the battles that are a war on the entire West, Israel Gans, chairman of the Maine Yesha Settler Council, said in a statement to Reuters. Underscoring the tensions, around 10 rockets were fired from Lebanon into Israel on Wednesday, targeting locations including the coastal city of Tel Aviv, with no injuries, the Israeli military said. Israeli media reported that a rocket had landed near Israel's main Ben Gurion airport. Nearly two-thirds of Israelis believe Trump would be better for Israel than his Democratic Party rival Kamala Harris, according to a survey from the Israel Democracy Institute. I think it's good for Israel, said Jerusalem resident Nissim Addis. He proved the last time he was the president, he moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and everything that he said, he did. Yes, I want to aspire to a freaking pedo who could now run a country. Oh, wait, we already do that. This is from Al Jazeera. More than 30 killed in Israeli attacks across Gaza as hospital hit again. U.S. says Israel still not doing enough to improve dire humanitarian situation, doesn't outline consequences of failure.
The Israeli military has pounded the Gaza Strip, killing dozens of people, mainly in the north, and again attacking the last partially functioning hospital in the area. At least 33 people were killed in air raids across the enclave, including 20 in the northern town of Beit Lahiya, 4 in Gaza City, 6 in central areas, and 3 in southern Khan Yunis, Al Jazeera Arabic sources and the Wafa news agency reported late on Monday. Aid Sabah, the director of nursing at Kamal Adwan Hospital in the northern part of the Palestinian territory, said Israeli jets and quadcopter drones hit the children's ward of the facility, injuring medics and patients. The upper floors were damaged, and some of the children and newborn babies were injured, Sabah told Al Jazeera by telephone. Journalists, nurses, and other medical staff were also injured, he said, adding that this was the second day the hospital came under Israeli fire. A week back, Israeli forces violently raided Kamal Adwan Hospital and detained dozens of people, including nearly all of its medical staff. That left the facility with 4 doctors and 50 volunteers, medical workers, and nurses. The towns of Beit Lahiya, where the hospital is located, Jabalia, and Beit Hanun have been witnessing waves of attacks in the past month as the Israeli military has intensified its air and ground operations in the north. Despite several Israeli-enforced displacement orders, tens of thousands of civilians are still in the north. Many of them told Al Jazeera that they fear leaving the area because of the risk of being hit by Israeli snipers, the dangers of being attacked in Israeli-designated so-called safe zones that Israel repeatedly hits, or to never be allowed to return to their homes. The Israeli military claims its aim is to avoid the regrouping of Hamas fighters, but on top of escalating its attacks, it has laid siege to several areas in the north, further choking the already scarce aid allowed to enter. In October, Israel allowed a daily average of 30 humanitarian trucks to enter Gaza, 6% of the supplies allowed into the Strip before the war, according to Philippi Lazzarini, head of the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees. Israel officially notified the UN that it was ending its agreement with UNRWA, alleging that some of its staff workers were Hamas fighters who took part in the October 7, 2023 attack on southern Israel. The agency said in the Israeli decision will lead to the collapse of aid in Gaza. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said UN lawyers are reviewing the move. In mid-October, the United States issued a rare warning telling Israel to take specific steps to improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza within 30 days or risk seeing military aid restricted. As of Monday, the results were not good enough, U.S. Department of State spokesman Matthew Miller told reporters. They certainly do not have a pass. They have failed to implement all the things that we recommended, Miller added, but declined to say what consequences Israel would face if it failed to implement the requests. The U.S. is Israel's main supplier of weapons. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken also spoke to Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant by telephone, urging him to substantially increase and sustain humanitarian aid, including food, medicine, and other essential supplies, to civilians across all of Gaza. Israel's war in Gaza has killed at least 44,000 Palestinians and injured 100,000 since October 7, 2023. An estimated 1,100 people were killed in Israel during the Hamas-led attacks that day, and more than 200 were taken captive. And let's just add that Israel knew that it was going to happen, where it was going to happen, when it was going to happen.
How?
And they used it as an excuse to invade Gaza.
Just like they used 9/11 as an excuse to try to get us to start war with the Middle East, and it kind of worked.
When we should have been invading Saudi Arabia, we invaded Afghanistan and Iraq. Yep. We shouldn't have invaded anywhere. We shouldn't have invaded Saudi Arabia.
I'm just saying that Netanyahu was behind both of them, so they're just playing the long game.
This is from Mondoweiss. The U.S. at a crossroads after Trump's return. The 2024 presidential election was more than just a setback for the Democrats. It exposed the entrenched racism of the country's myopic political elite, which features a bipartisan moral blindness towards injustice abroad, notably the genocide in Gaza.
The aftermath of the 2024 presidential election, marked by Donald Trump's second-term victory over Kamala Harris, reveals more than a setback for the Democratic Party. It exposes a deep-seated failure within American political culture, shattering the enduring myth of the United States as a shining city on a hill. This electoral outcome underscores America's entrenched racism, myopia of its political elite, and a bipartisan moral blindness that tolerates unspeakable injustices abroad, notably the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Any pretense of enlightened democratic values now flickers dimly, suffocated by hypocrisy and decay. The Democratic Party's inability to present a credible alternative to Trump is nothing short of catastrophic. For too long, they relied on Joe Biden, whose visible cognitive decline and age created unease, even among his supporters. When faced with a former president whose tenure was marked by division and authoritarian impulses, one might expect a formidable challenger. Instead, the party clung to an uninspired succession plan, elevating Kamala Harris by default rather than by popular appeal or genuine momentum. This failure highlights the increasing influence of moneyed interests in the party, where policy, innovation, and moral leadership are too often sacrificed for campaign dollars and corporate endorsements. The result? A party that views voter loyalty as a given rather than something earned through bold and meaningful leadership. For many Americans, Harris's campaign lacked resonance, offering little beyond a continuation of the Biden administration and a reliance on identity politics rather than a transformative vision. Her historic status as a woman of color on a major ticket was significant, but it was never sufficient to inspire confidence on its own. Without the charisma or policy depth to engage on an electorate disillusioned by an economy that fails to meet their needs, Harris became emblematic of the Democratic Party's growing detachment from the American public. Where was the decisive leadership required to counter Trump's populist momentum? Instead of energizing voters with new ideas, the party delivered a predictable, cautious platform that failed to connect with an electorate burdened by economic anxiety and culture disillusionment. Yes, because when you run strictly on, if not me, then Cheeto, people are like, you know what? Cheetos aren't bad every once in a while, I guess. Trump's reelection is not an outliner, but a searing indictment of the American electorate. His return to office demonstrates an America willing to endorse the ugliest aspects of its character: resurgent nativism, casual xenophobia, and an appeal to authoritarianism that flouts democratic principles. Trump's victory is not just a political statement, but a cultural one, affirming the darkest impulses in American society, rooted in a long-standing cultural and racial rot that has festered unchecked. It's just white nationalism. This decay is fueled in part by an education system and socialization that extols a false consciousness of American exceptionalism. Generations of Americans have been taught to view the U.S. as a model democracy while remaining insulated from the truth of its historical and ongoing injustices. This myth has bred a form of willful ignorance that blinds voters to the deeper issues plaguing the nation and primes them to support leaders who exploit this distorted patriotism. Trump's victory is overshadowed by an even deeper moral crisis: the bipartisan complicity in supporting Israel's actions in Gaza, a stance that has alienated progressives and severely damaged America's moral standing worldwide. For decades, leaders from both parties have perpetuated the myth of Israel as a democratic ally, even as it enacts policies that systematically dispossesses and oppress Palestinians. Here lies a glaring contradiction. The United States, self-styled as the global defender of human rights, remains complicit in actions that blatantly violate these very principles, cloaking its endorsement in the guise of democratic solidarity. This hypocrisy is as brazen as it is corrosive, exposing the rot at the heart of the U.S. foreign policy by championing a rhetoric of freedom while enabling subjugation of an entire people. American leaders have chosen political expediency over moral integrity. Those few voices within the Democratic Party who dared to challenge this stance were marginalized, leaving progressives and ordinary citizens alike disillusioned and disheartened. Trump's re-election exposes the hollowness of the American mythos as a shining city on a hill. This image, cherished in American rhetoric, has always been more illusion than reality, now shattered by historical injustices, deepening racial divides, deepening racial divides and a foreign policy marred by contradiction. How can a country that elects a leader with contempt for democratic norms and a taste for autocratic allies claim moral leadership on the global stage? Trump's second term should compel the U.S. to confront its own hypocrisy. A nation that professes democratic ideals, yet discards them when they prove inconvenient, both at home and abroad. The rhetoric of freedom now rings hollow against the backdrop of stark inequities, deep-seated racial biases, and a bipartisan disregard for international law. The illusion of American moral superiority no longer withstands global scrutiny. Instead, the U.S. must face an uncomfortable truth. It has repeatedly fallen short of its supposed principles, nurturing authoritarian impulses domestically while supporting oppression overseas. The Democratic Party's failures are not merely tactical. They reveal a profound disconnect from the electorate. Cloistered in the corridors of Washington, D.C., Democratic leaders presumed that moral posturing and progressive rhetoric would suffice. They failed to grasp that a vast portion of Americans felt abandoned by a party more committed to platitudes than to addressing real grievances. While the party's platform superficially addressed social justice issues, it neglected to tackle economic anxiety and social instability, leaving a void readily filled. Do I have to read that? Leaving a void Trump readily filled. Somebody did that on purpose, you know that, right?
Yeah, that's good.
Identity politics, though valuable, cannot substitute for a vision of structural change, especially in a nation as divided as the U.S. Yet even more egregious is the party's implicit support of Israel's abuses, a stance that has alienated progressives and deepened the Democratic Party's moral crisis. Progressive voters were left politically adrift, feeling abandoned by a Democratic Party that sidelined transformative policies in favor of a tepid, centrist approach under Harris's candidacy, a strategy that proved disastrously ineffective. Faced with a platform devoid of bold commitments on healthcare, climate change, and economic justice, many progressives grew disillusioned. The absence of genuine vision led some voters to either abstain from the election or to turn toward third-party alternatives, underscoring the chasm between the party's establishment and the priorities of its grassroots. The Democratic establishment's lack of moral courage on Israel's human rights violations further estranged the left, leaving many progressives unable to support a platform they saw as morally compromised. In clinging to the status quo, the party undermined the very coalition that could have secured its victory, ultimately paving the way for Trump's return to power. Trump's victory represents more than a political comeback. It stands as a sobering warning. America has chosen a leader who embodies some of its most troubling traits. A figurehead of racial animosity, disregard for democratic norms, and populist anti-intellectualism. Yet beyond Trump's personal allure, this election reveals a nation struggling with its own unaddressed failings and an elite dangerously out of touch with the widening chasm between its rhetoric and the lived realities of ordinary citizens. Domestically and on the world stage, this disconnect signals an urgent need to reconcile American ideals with its actions, especially in foreign policy, where America's image as a moral leader has eroded. The unrestrained influence of money in politics, coupled with a deficit education system that perpetuates myths of American exceptionalism has stymied critical engagement with these deep-seated issues. The political elites seem incapable of confronting these hypocrisies both domestically and internationally. Acknowledging and rectifying the complicity in Israel's treatment of Palestinians would be a start. Only by aligning its actions with its professed values can the U.S. hope to restore its integrity. Until then, the myth of the shining city on a hill will continue to erode, leaving behind a more accurate image, a nation ensnared in moral contradictions, searching for its true role on the world stage. This is from Mondowise. Israel is hitting a wall in Lebanon. What is its endgame? Israel's military campaign in southern Lebanon is failing. As Israel runs out of options, the U.S. is scrambling for a way out of the Lebanese quagmire, including by reviving hopes for a Gaza ceasefire.
Not every objective can be achieved through military means. Those are the words of Israeli War Minister Yoav Gallant on October 28th, commenting on Israel's war on Lebanon. Painful compromises will have to be made, he said. Gallant's comments came amid Israeli reports of a possible deal to end the war in Lebanon, drafted by U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein. However, on Wednesday, the newly elected Secretary General of Hezbollah, Naim Qassem, said in his inaugural speech that talks about a potential deal were noise without results. Qassem insisted that Hezbollah's position is to have a ceasefire first and then negotiate the details of a lasting agreement. Nearly a month ago, Gallant's rhetoric was different. The war minister took pride that Israel had, in his words, destroyed most of Hezbollah's infrastructure, pledging not to stop the war until the Lebanese resistance group's full destruction. At the time, Israel had assassinated several top-ranking military and political leaders in Hezbollah, including its iconic Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah in the wake of the exploding pager and electronics attack in mid-September. Israel was at the height of its euphoria, which gave it the confidence to escalate its attacks and launch a ground invasion. Even 10 days ago, Gallant was saying that Israel had moved from the phase of defeating Hezbollah to the phase of destroying it, but Gallant's tone would shift in a matter of days. What happened in the interim was that Hezbollah regrouped and redoubled its military efforts in repelling the Israeli onslaught. Instead of collapsing after the assassination of its entire top military echelon, rocket fire from Lebanon increased in intensity and destructive capacity, challenging Israeli claims that the majority of Hezbollah's arsenal had been destroyed or disabled. Haifa came under fire, as well as Akka and the northern suburbs of Tel Aviv. Prime Minister Netanyahu's residence in Caesarea was also struck by a drone while he was absent from his house. Israel started its ground invasion of Lebanon in the first week of October, officially aiming to clear southern Lebanon of Hezbollah's presence and create a buffer zone that might extend up to the Litani River. Weeks passed with combat barely advancing past those same areas, mostly centering around the villages of Edessa and Kirv Kila in the southeastern bloc. The villages of Yarun, Rimesh, and Aida al-Shabab. Aida al-Shayab. Damn it.
Oh, you said Shabab.
I said Shabab.
I read it as just Shabab.
The villages Yarun, Rimesh, and Aida al-Shayab in the central bloc, and the villages of Ramia, Marwahin, Diarrhea. That's not funny. The villages of Ramia, Marwanhin, De'era, and Narquara in the Western Bloc. It was in the Western Bloc where Israeli forces first tried to take cover from Hezbollah's fire behind the international peacekeeping forces and later opened fire at them. Although Israel carpet-bombed several Lebanese border villages and towns, and even reached several military tunnels near the border, its soldiers continue to come under fire and sustain heavy losses on both sides of the Blue Line. Earlier this week, the Israeli army admitted to the death of 15 soldiers, including officers, and the wounding of 60 others within 48 hours. Hezbollah, for its part, claims that its guerrillas have killed no less than 90 Israeli soldiers and officers while wounding 600 since the beginning of Israel's ground invasion of southern Lebanon. What Israeli military officials have begun to understand, according to the Israeli daily Haaretz, is that the operations in Lebanon have exhausted their objectives. Prolonging them will only result in more casualties. In the face of this seemingly immobile situation, some voices in the Israeli military have begun to pressure to reach a political agreement to avoid ending the Lebanon offensive with nothing to show for it, a repeat of the 2006 war with Hezbollah. This is the crucial context within which to understand U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein's comments on Thursday. The former Israeli soldier turned U.S. diplomat told the Lebanese state that it shouldn't allow Hezbollah to tie Lebanon's fate to other conflicts in the region, referencing Hezbollah's insistence on maintaining a support front for Gaza until Israel halts its genocidal war. Right before Hochstein's arrival, Israel had given the U.S. a document stating its conditions for a ceasefire with Lebanon. It included allowing Israel to operate freely in Lebanese territory and airspace at any point in the future. The Lebanese government, represented by Prime Minister Najib Mikati and the Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri, who Hezbollah delegated to negotiate in its name, rejected the proposal. Ahead of Hochstein's current visit to the region, Israeli media reported on the potential deal that would lead to the cessation of hostilities. According to Axios, the proposal was based on an amended version of the UN Resolution 1701, which ended Israel's 2006 war in Lebanon. The proposal, according to Axios, stipulated that there would be a ceasefire announcement followed by 60 days of halted fighting. During that time, Hezbollah would pull back heavy parts of its weaponry north of the Litani, while Israel would gradually withdraw its troops behind the Blue Line. This would be followed by the deployment of 8,000 troops from the Lebanese army along the border. The Axios report indicates that the U.S. believes Hezbollah, after being dealt a crippling blow following the assassination of its top leaders, might be persuaded to end its operations against Israel and give up its support on Gaza. This seems to be a general belief among Western allies of Israel. A week ago, Germany's Foreign Minister, Annalena Baerbock, said during a visit to Beirut that she believed that Israel had succeeded in significantly weakening Hezbollah. A few days before visiting Beirut, Baerbock had publicly justified Israel's bombing of civilians in Gaza and Lebanon to defend itself.
Because, of course, Germany's like, we like this genocide, this Holocaust that you got going on here.
Amid this conflicting rhetoric, including the Israeli military's own admission of its incapability in achieving Israel's goals through military means, diplomatic moves continue to scramble for a way out of the Lebanese quagmire, including by reviving hopes for a Gaza ceasefire. On Sunday, Israel's Mossad chief arrived in Qatar to meet with the chief of the CIA and the foreign minister of Qatar to discuss the revival of ceasefire in Gaza. On Wednesday, the spokesperson of Qatar's foreign ministry, Majed Al-Ansari, said that progress was made towards a ceasefire in Gaza. Axios reported that CIA's William Burns was drafting a proposal that would include a month-long ceasefire and the release of 8 Israeli captives by Hamas in exchange for Israel's release of dozens of Palestinian prisoners. The reported proposal doesn't address the key issues that led to the failure of the previous ceasefire talks, namely Israel's refusal to leave the occupied Philadelphia and Netzarim corridors and its refusal to definitively end the war. However, the attempt to revive the talks indicates a need to reach an agreement which would make a permanent agreement with Hezbollah possible. Meanwhile, Naam Qassem reaffirmed on Thursday that the movement had rebuilt its command and control structure and that its fighting capacities were intact, repudiating Hochstein's expectations that Hezbollah is prepared to fold. Hezbollah's position also increases the difficulty of Netanyahu's race against time. For one, the Israeli Prime Minister realizes that his bet to break the Lebanese resistance has failed, and his army is telling him that the time has come for political solutions. In addition, he knows that the upcoming vote in the U.S., regardless of who wins, will free the incoming U.S. administration from electoral calculations to push harder to end the war on both fronts, in Lebanon and in Gaza. This might explain Gallant's instructions to Israeli troops in Gaza on Wednesday to exercise as much military pressure as possible in order to free the hostages. These instructions have coincided with Israel's ongoing brutal assault on northern Gaza as Israeli forces rush to complete the destruction of all foundations of life in Jabalia, Beit Lahiya, and Beit Hanun, with the aim of expelling as many Palestinians as possible. A month after Israel began its offensive in Lebanon, Netanyahu stood before the UN and claimed to be bringing about a new Middle East. The prospects of ending the war and the year-long Israeli onslaught across the region may result in a new Middle East, but it will look very similar to the old one. The only difference will be over 43,000 dead bodies, piles of ruins, and the collapse of rules-based international order. This is from Mondoweiss. UAW members push their union to divest from Israeli genocide. Rank-and-file members of UAW are demanding that union leadership immediately divest from Israeli bonds.
On the morning of October 7th, 2024, members of the International Executive Board, IEB, of the United Automobile, Aerospace, and Agricultural Implement Workers of America, UAW, found their inboxes flooded with hundreds of emails from union members around the country. The messages all demanded the same thing: that the UAW immediately divest from a relentless U.S.-backed Israeli genocide responsible for the death of an estimated 186,000 Palestinians in Gaza. The UAW, which represents about 370,000 auto, academic, legal, and weapons industry workers, maintains somewhere between $400,000 and $1 million in investments in Israel bonds, which directly fund the ongoing and spreading violence in occupied Palestine, Lebanon, Yemen, and beyond. The company's own website highlights the crucial role of Israel bonds during this time of conflict and war. Echoing demands by Arab, Black, and other UAW members in 1973, UAW members today are demanding to know why the IEB is investing their dues money to support an expanding U.S.-backed genocide. The same day as the mass email campaign, members of UAW Labor for Palestine, a rank-and-file-led initiative building solidarity with Palestinian workers as part of the Labor for Palestine National Network, confronted UAW President Shawn Fain at Black Lake Lodge, the union's conference retreat center. Referencing a failed decision this past summer, wherein the IEB voted against divesting from its Israel bond holdings, union members asked Fain, "The next time the UAW IEB holds a vote to divest, will you vote yes?" Fain assured rank-and-file members that he, in fact, will vote for divestment. Days later, on October 13th, Unite All Workers for Democracy, UAWD, the Reform Caucus, whose members currently hold a majority of the seats on the IEB, voted overwhelmingly in its first ever convention to endorse rank-and-file UAW members' resolution calling for the IEB to divest from Israel bonds. This critical step reveals broad support for divestment from across the UAW. The UAWD platform states UAWD supports the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement called for by Palestinian unions and workers and seeks to end all UAW investments and corporations perpetuating human rights violations. As the majority of the UAW's IEB are members of UAWD, rank-and-file members believe they must be held accountable to this position and vote in favor of immediate divestment. The mushrooming divestment movement began to swell on college campuses last spring and is now taking root once again within the labor movement. Like the parallel student movement calling on higher education institutions to divest from Israeli genocide and apartheid, UAW members argue that the labor movement must do no less. The demand is national in scope, with proponents across every unionized sector of the UAW. The urgency of the situation is increasingly compelling U.S. union members to answer the Palestinian trade union call to end all complicity and stop arming Israel. Under growing rank-and-file pressure, the UAW has called for a permanent ceasefire and a weapons embargo against Israel's expanding genocide. However, union leadership must take the next logical step and divest member dues from Israel bonds. While some IEB members argue that divestment is simply too expensive, rank-and-file UAW members refuse to put a price on honoring the Palestinian trade union picket line against genocide. Such a vote, if passed at the IEB level, would not only be historic, with the UAW becoming the first major U.S. institution of any kind to divest from Israel's genocide, but it would also be in alignment with the values of a majority of rank-and-file union members from across the country, ranging from manufacturing workers, academic, legal, and research workers, and other sectors. Moreover, polls show that a majority of people in the U.S., 7 out of 10 regardless of political affiliation, oppose Israeli genocide in Palestine. The UAW, taking its logical step to divest, would send a powerful message to all labor unions and universities that they too can join this movement and divest from genocide now. Too late. Silence and unconscionable fear are the allies of corruption and injustice. We are losing innocent lives every single day in Gaza and beyond. How can we, in good conscience, continue to contribute to the senseless and horrific violence and destruction? We must stand up, show up, and speak up for our siblings. The UAW must divest from genocide. UAW Labor for Palestine will continue mobilizing rank-and-file members to demand that the IEB divest immediately. We join the student movement in chanting, disclose, divest. We will not stop. We will not rest. This is from Rolling Stone. Why Kamala Harris lost and why it wasn't close. Americans are deeply dissatisfied with the brutal economy and punish Democrats over it. And Democrats will blame
Everyone but themselves.
third-party voters. They won't even blame the right, man. They're just going to blame like anyone that didn't vote for them, which is anyone who voted for anything other than them.
Yeah.
Voted for the guy with the worm in his brain? There you go. Now you got one that just doesn't have a brain.
It happened again. Democrats lost a winnable election to a racist, orange makeup wearing carnival barker, despite his odiousness, immorality, and unbridled corruption. This time, Donald Trump campaigned on an even darker agenda. The mass deportation of migrants, calls for more violent policing, and demands of retribution against his enemies. And he didn't have to try to steal the election in the courts or a violent coup. In the battleground states, he appears to have run the table, and he will likely win the popular vote outright, something Republican hasn't done in 2 decades.
Oh, ouch, I didn't know that.
There are plenty of factors that could help explain why Vice President Kamala Harris lost, and why the race ultimately was not that close. Joe Biden's crushing unpopularity, pervasive sexism, racism, and xenophobia, an American culture that stupidly valorizes the ultra-wealthy and licks their boots. There was the Harris campaign's decision to run a safe, staid campaign from Democrats' favorite failed playbook, be like Republicans. There was her refusal to break from Biden over his support for Israel's war in Gaza, carnage that plays out on our screens daily and has particularly affected young people. The most likely explanation, however, for why Harris lost is the most basic one. Americans are deeply dissatisfied with a brutal economy. After Washington put an end to COVID-era pandemic aid programs, Americans suffered 2 years of sky-high inflation, affecting the price of nearly everything alongside higher interest rates, which drove up credit card rates, mortgage rates, the cost of car loans, and more. Amid a punishing cost of living crisis, voters have now punished Democrats. Exit polls and other survey results coming out of the 2024 election are incredibly clear that this contest was, as often the case, about the economy, stupid. Edison Research exit polls show that 2/3 of voters, the state of America's economy is poor or not so good. 69% of them voted for Trump. Asked what the most important issue in their vote was, 31% of voters said the economy, and 79% of those voters voted for Trump. The Fox News voter analysis survey results often offer similar findings. 63% of respondents said the state of the economy is poor or not so good, and 68% of them said they were supporting Trump. Along with the 39% of respondents who said the economy and jobs are the most important issue facing the country, 60% said they were backing Trump. Similarly, 40% of respondents said the single most important factor in their votes is the high price for gas, groceries, and other goods. 64% of them said they were supporting Trump.
Okay. I'm just wondering how people think like Trump means cheap. Well, just because he's cheap and the stuff he sells and does is cheap doesn't mean he's going to make things cheap for us.
Let's be real. They're not going to learn. If they didn't learn before, they're not going to learn now.
Hey, either the Democrats.
We got to just make fun of their fucking economy as much as we can.
The Democrats not going to learn either.
No, they're not.
Watch them prance Kamala back out there next year. Dude, not next year. You know what I mean. Next
They won't even do a
election.
primary, you think?
I would.
People are just like, there's not going to be another election. No.
Well, even King Koopa has a Mario that knocks him down. Also, I'm gonna kind of offense, be surprised if Trump makes it through his presidency alive.
Yeah, true.
So he's a walking heart attack waiting to happen.
Pretty much.
But all his doctors said he's great.
There's good reason to distrust that Trump's 2025 agenda will financially benefit the average American. His plan to impose widespread tariffs on imported goods will raise prices for consumers. His plan to preserve his tax cuts for the rich and further slash the corporate tax rate will ensure once again primarily benefit the wealthiest Americans. Trump has promised to give a top administration role to the world's richest man, Elon Musk, who pledged to impose major spending cuts that would involve some temporary hardship. But Americans enraged about the economy were not voting for Trump's economic agenda in particular. They were simply registering their disapproval of the state of the economy as it stands today.
Does he know what a temporary hardship is? Because I would gladly take your worst day on my best.
It's funny, he wants to give Americans austerity while taking subsidies for his businesses.
No. He wants to help all the people in North Carolina while making them pay $400 for a satellite dish and then, $200-something a month that they're automatically enrolled in. And by the way, if you don't have internet service to be able to connect to... You also have to have your electricity to be able to get your satellite dish to work, to connect to the internet, to get cell phone service. You probably have a house with electricity and don't actually need it at that point. Yeah. Oh, it also takes like a week to get there to you unless you have like the best UPS plan.
We covered this.
I know. I'm just throwing it out there now that he's going to, make America great again. Was he here when America was great? Or was he over there getting blood diamond money?
That he was.
That's right.
America was never great. This election cycle, there has been a prevailing wisdom among some Democrats and the broader pundit class that Americans are wrong to think the economy is bad. In fact, it's great. Why the gloom? Perhaps folks are misremembering their own financial situations during the Trump era. Don't people know that inflation has finally slowed? Have they seen these GDP growth charts? Early on in the pandemic, the U.S. Census Bureau started asking Americans questions about the state of their household, including whether it's difficult to pay typical household expenses. When Trump lost in 2020, the percentage of Americans who said it was difficult to pay for their bills was around 34%. The figure climbed until Congress passed new pandemic aid programs, at which point it dropped considerably. As those aid programs came to a close, the percentage of Americans struggling to pay their bills spiked, and Biden's approval ratings fell. Ending pandemic aid, combined with inflationary price hikes and higher interest rates, created a financial disaster that has not ended. As of September, 37% of Americans reported having difficulty paying their typical household expenses, a slight uptick from earlier this year. That brutal financial reality created a brutal 2024 political environment for Democrats and helped Republicans deliver a knockout blow.
It is what it is. Let's watch the world burn.
Yeah.
What do you really say?
I mean, Democrats just suck. Neoliberalism is dead.
The two-party system doesn't work.
It's been dead. 1992 called. They want their presidential strategy playbook back. Yeah, you have to run left policy. They never will do it. They're never going to do it. But you have to run to the left. They're not going to do it. The only way to fight this right-wing populism bullshit is the left. Yep. We have to actually have somebody. Let us have someone and don't kill them automatically. Please. For once.
CIA, we're talking to you. You know you. We know what you did to the Kennedys. You guys, he never had a worm in his head. You guys planted that information. Because what you did to his dad, and you're like, remember? We're going to put a worm in your head, bitch.
Put a bullet in dad uncle's head.
Yeah. Now we're going to put a worm in yours. It was just symbolism. There was never actually a worm, they were telling you.
I mean, this is twice now you've lost to a guy who shits his pants regularly.
Like, on stage, though. Like, Biden shits his pants, too, but at least he doesn't grunt like a little baby in the corner, like, mm. Like, that's what my toddler did.
And what you could really learn from this, you should have let Bernie win. He would have beat him twice. And we'd be in a much different situation.
But then again, at the same time, what you really should have learned was... No, what you really should have learned that we're not okay with watching a Holocaust. We don't want to watch a genocide. We don't want to watch Auschwitz
2.0.
Yeah, I mean, literally. Oh, I'm sorry. They're not tattooing numbers on their arms. They're doing it on their foreheads. Because,
I don't even want to say that. At least you could roll your sleeves down. You can't really cover your face. The only way to remove numbers at that point is to just horribly disfigure yourself.
Yeah. She wouldn't it.
I'm just saying, Germany going over there and be like, I like what you're doing here with your genocide. We should have learned from you guys. Or we taught you guys well. You know, I'm just saying, Germany, maybe you should just like stay in Germany right now instead of being over there like something.
Germany, touch grass your coat.
I do find that kind of hilarious. They're like, yeah, you absolutely have the right to defend yourself.
Yeah.
We should have defended ourselves harder.